That's
And your
great.
name is Saied.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much
Well,
for.
thank you. I'm sorry for the screw up. The last
No.
one of this was the final exam.
No, that's great. Professor, thank you very much for joining me in this
So,
interview.
good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
It is morning here.
And it's afternoon here. Professor, if you allow me, before the interview begins, I will introduce you to the Iranian audience who will see this conversation later.
Okay.
I know you are so world famous that I don't to introduce you, professor and student.
Okay, I don't think I'm that famous, but that's fine.
Yes. Professor and students of philosophy in Iran have learned a lot from your books. But I will say briefly that Professor Harry Gensler is a professor of philosophy at Loyola University, Chicago. His Michigan PhD features a dissertation on the Golden Rule under William Frankna. He taught at Loyola from 1981 to 1996, and then returned full-time in 2014. He has published 7 books on logic, 8 on ethics, and 1 on Catholic philosophy. He has published many articles and Logicula and Ethicula, software for logic and ethics. His extensive personal website has more information on him. Professor, thank you again for joining me in this interview. That's a lot of.
Thank you. I feel very honored.
Thank you very much. When you accept my request for this interview, I'm really surprised. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. In this interview, we'll discuss topics related to ethic and religion. But firstly, I would like to start from earliest stage in your life, your personal journey toward academic and intellectual study. How did it start? Did you start reading philosophy from childhood, or it began in older age? Please tell us about this. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll kind of mix my religious background in too, religion and philosophy. I grew up Catholic. I've always been Catholic and Christian, and I always wanted to be a priest. Is that like an imam in your tradition? You know, a servant of the religion for the people. But I was in the seminary. Are you at Coke? QOC?
I am a clergyman.
Are you at where? Are you in Tehran or where?
I am.
What city are you in?
I can understand. I am a clergyman and a PhD student. What do you?
Okay. So we are both clergy. Okay. I wanted to be. I spent some time in Mexico, and I felt like I didn't want to be a priest in a parish, maybe foreign. But then I started into philosophy, and I loved philosophy. I started in college, in the seminary, and all of the college program was later, the last 2 years in philosophy. But I started studying it early, and I studied St. Thomas Aquinas, and I knew I wanted to go into philosophy. And let's see what, I joined the Jesuits. We're a religious order. You know, this is this retirement home where I am. I'm suffering from cancer. Is for retired Jesuits. I taught for many years, but now I'm mostly sick. I'm still doing some writing though. An important part of my life was when I discovered the Golden Rule: treat others as you want to be treated. I'm wearing my Persian version.
That's great.
Now.
Thank you very much.
And that transformed my thinking about ethics and about ethics in religion. And first of all, I used it as a way of reasoning about ethics, which it is. It's very useful. But later in life, I was introduced, I knew it was common to the religions of the world, but I didn't make much of it. But later on, I did. I think that the world needs something to bring us together in love and peace and harmony and fairness. And the world is sorely lacking in these things. And the golden rule is as part of the Chinese tradition with Confucius and the Persian tradition, even before the Muslims, Zoroastrian, and it's very strong in Islam. I wrote a paper on that for an Iranian journal, and it is indeed worldwide. And this is important that we have such a wonderful principle. And I became a big fan of the Golden Rule, which links us all together and shows us a better way. And I have a particular connection with certain countries. I taught in China, and several of my books have been translated into Persian. And I've had very good discussions with people, particularly one graduate student, Mohammed Kamiri. I don't know if you know him, but he, we talk about common issues about religion and ethics, particularly. In one way, I view Christianity and Islam as kind of sister religions. We are both called Abrahamic. We both stem from Abraham. Together, we cover, I think, a little over half of the world. And we both believe in a supreme God that we worship and love and try to serve. And God has a will for us. And the central part of the will is that we love God above all things and love our neighbor. And that is often expressed in the Golden Rule. So we have a lot to bring us together. Unfortunately, there are a lot of conflicts, and what we need to do is to understand each other and to pray together to a common God who will help us to put the world in the world needs to come together. We have common problems. We're fighting COVID throughout the world. We're fighting poverty. We're fighting global warming. And instead, we fight each other. We try to hurt each other. We try to be, and the Golden Rule I see as a way of, bringing the world together. And I think religious people have a much stronger ethics. Maybe we'll get into some of this later.
Thank you very much for your excellent answer. Thank you very much. You are a great philosopher and more than great person. Thank you very much. Professor, if you allow me, let's talk about some of your books and what was your purpose in writing each book and the story behind them. I share a screen and I want to ask you about it. Can you see that?
Oh yeah. Ethics: A Contemporary Introduction.
Yes, that's a great
and they
book.
are translating the third edition into Farsi, Persian right now. This is in about 5 other languages too.
That's a great book. I want to ask you, tell us about this book and what purpose to writing this great book.
Well, thank you very much. It features stories from students explaining their perception of morality, which is sometimes very limited. Like the first chapter, as my beginning students think, ethics is based on culture. Good is what is socially accepted. Now, if you think a little bit, your culture can teach bad things. It can teach hatred. It can teach ignorance. It can, the United States, it supported slavery. And this is not a good way of thinking. You need some independent norm of, and it forces everyone to conform, and you can't think for yourself. And so there's this little presentation from a student, and then it's followed by a deeper philosophical response by me, showing problems. And it sort of builds up toward the golden rule stuff, as that's further down. So you have a cultural relativism, good is what is socially accepted. Subjectivism, good is what I like. The problem is the individual can have very messed up desires about how to live, you know, maybe full of hatred or racism or something. Supernaturalism bases ethics on God's will in a very direct way. We'll get maybe into that further when we talk about my more recent book. There's two approaches, very broadly speaking, that religious thinkers take about ethics. One is that God just arbitrarily decides right and wrong. You know, it's his entire free choice, and he could desire that we hate each other. And then there's the alternative view, which in the West sometimes called natural law, that there's an objective right or wrong, that something isn't good just because God desires it. God knows what's good. He knows what's good for us, and he wills it. But it's something we can do through our own minds too. This leads to a greater sharing. We'll get into that more later. And then emotivism is a very anti-rational, good is just hurrah. Prescriptivism is a way of trying to get some objectivity. And then the next three chapters go together: consistency, the golden rule, and moral rationality. I see the golden rule as the core of, as really the most important element of morality, and it's even on my Persian shirt here.
That's great.
Treat others as you want to be treated. It's global. And I see it as a consistency principle, which is part of a larger group. Be consistent in your beliefs, be consistent in your principles, live in accord with your principles, make the same evaluation about the same sort of action, regardless of where you are in the situation, keep your ends and means in harmony with each other, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of consistency principles, which I claim are based on reason. They're kind of like logic. The golden rule is the most important one, and I try to formulate it in a precise way that avoids objections. A lot of philosophers reject the golden rule. They say, treat others as you want to be treated. You want the doctor to remove your appendix, therefore you should remove your doctor's appendix, which is kind of crazy. I try to give a more precise version. Treat others only as you're willing to be treated in the same situation. That gets kind of technical, but I think you can get around the problems. How do you apply it? Well, I have a little rule called Kiko, know, imagine, test, act. I'm going to do something to another. You have to know what you're doing. How does this affect the person? You have to understand your action and how it affects others. That's the knowledge part. Imagination, you imagine yourself in the place of the other person on the receiving end of the action. So you do a little role reversal in your mind. What if that were done to me? How do I react to that? And the third part is you ask that. And if you're not willing that you be treated that way, then you can't really follow the principle and treat the other person that way. And finally, you act in accord with the golden rule. My favorite example is a little fable story that goes back. It's very common in the United States. It's very common all over the world. I think it started in India, and it's called the grandfather and his son, or the wooden shoes, or whatever. You have an old man who lives with the family, the grandpa, and he slobbers his food, and the family doesn't like it. So they say, you got to sit by a table by yourself. You can't eat with the family. You know, you can't eat with the children. You sit, and that just tore his heart out. So the little boy, and also I'm missing the part here. He drops his dish on the floor and it breaks. And the family, you know, he's shaky. We old people get that. And so the parents say, oh, you got to sit by yourself. You can't associate with us. You need a wooden bowl that won't break. Now the little boy starts making a wooden bowl, and the parents say, what are you doing? And the little boy says, I'm making a wooden bowl for when you two get old and have to sit by yourself. And that was the moment of wisdom for them, because they saw themselves in the place of grandpa and how sad he was. And they did not want to be treated that way. And then they changed their mind. They said, we're treating grandpa badly. If I imagine myself being treated that way, I reject the idea. That's one of my favorite examples. Then I get real technical.
That's great. Thank you very much. Another book I want to share with you, and I ask you to talk about it, this great book, Formal Ethics. Please,
oh, yeah.
Please talk about this book and the idea of this book. Thank you.
This was a very technical book. I wrote it early, and I wrote it before I became so enamored of the golden rule in different religions and different cultures. And before I became, but it works off of logic and these ethical principles, like treat others as you want to be treated, is based on that. I recently wrote an article on formal ethics for a Swedish journal. Since I've been sick here for like 6 months, and I wrote 2 articles. So this was an early sketch of the whole theory. And the article that I just wrote and sent in is kind of a chapter. It's kind of a little shorter version of the same thing, but it's about the whole theory, different kinds of consistency principles, et cetera, et cetera.
That's great. Thank you very much. And please, some talk about.
You've done your homework well.
I'm sorry about it. I'm just to hear about the story of writing these great books. And please, just a little talk about this book, Ethics and the Golden Rules.
This is, I published 16 books, and most of them involve the golden rule in some way. This book is entirely on the golden rule, and pretty much every aspect of it that I could find. And the title page there has the golden rule, do unto others, and it matches my t-shirt. So you have different religions with the symbols and that support the golden rule. Really, it's practically every religion, but these are, I didn't want to put more than 6 symbols. You can find Islam there very prominently, and Christianity and Judaism and, you know, Confucianism and just Buddhism and
that's
Sikh,
great.
You know. I don't have Sikh. I should. The thing is, you're limited. I limited myself to 8 of them. So it talks about the golden rule, how to formulate it, how to understand it, how to apply it to areas like moral education, business ethics, medical ethics. the history of the Golden Rule. And this is on the web too, my chronology. I have day by day or year by year, different events about the Golden Rule, and it's global. I mean, you have all over the world, and Persia was one of the beginning ones, along with India and China and ancient Greece. So which one was first, no one really knows. The dates for Zoroaster are plus or minus how many years. And then later on with Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim tradition, and some atheists and some, it tries to show. So there's a lot on the history of the Golden Rule. There's a lot on objections to the Golden Rule. There's a lot relating it to modern science, including evolution. How did we evolve to have these? Well, biology says a lot about that. One explanation why, humans are weak, we think, we have thinking powers, and believe it or not, biologists think that we cooperate pretty well. Now, I would hope it would be better, but at least, you look at humans, they work together, and they need a principle and of fairness, and then so forth. And there's psychology, there's sociology, so the goal is to link the Golden Rule with almost everything. Drama, movies, most movies have some sort of moral conflict which involves the Golden Rule. Literature, so it attempts to be very, very comprehensive treatment of the Golden Rule.
That's great. Thank you very much for your excellent and great answer in this part of interview. And then, Professor, I want to ask you about the philosophy of ethic. You are a great philosopher, and I ask you to define philosophy of ethics from us.
Okay, I look at philosophy as reasoning about the big questions of life. Reasoning involves getting the facts, involves understanding objections. You don't just say, this is right. When you're doing philosophy, you say, this is the question, this is the answer I'm arguing for. How would people object to it? And how would I answer their objection? So it's reasoning in this broad sense involving logic about the big questions of life, like the existence of God, the nature of morality. Is it about just how you feel, or about what your culture says? Is it more objective? Is it based on God's will? Are there moral truths at all? Do we have a duty to care for one another? Kind of are we free or determined? So philosophy I see as dealing with these big questions of life. They're related to science and history and so forth, but they're not exactly the same thing. A psychologist talks about causes of moral thinking. We say, yeah, okay. Are there moral truths? Do we just have different moral feelings? Is it objective? How do you reason about it? You have two people of completely different sides. You have a racist and someone who cares about everyone, regardless of their race. Can you reason about that? These are big questions. And the ethics, I would say, is reasoning about the big questions of morality. And these are, some of them are methodological. How do you reason about it? And some of them are the end result. How do you formulate the principles of ethics? Is it do whatever maximizes the balance of good over evil in the world, or pleasure over pain, or which I would reject, but it gets complicated. So there's a lot of reasoning about the big questions of morality, right or wrong, how we ought to live.
Thank you very much. And Professor, the relationship between religion and ethics is one of the most important issues with the history of several thousand years. I wanted you to tell us about this relationship.
Okay, there's one big question, and it goes back to ancient Greece. And I should say that the philosophy in the West and philosophy in the Muslim countries both go back to ancient Greece. In fact, the West borrowed a lot of the translations of Aristotle and so forth. So there's been a kind of a sharing. Socrates, ancient Greek philosopher, expressed the key question very early. And he said, suppose that something is good and God desires it. Which is prior? Does God desire, is something good because God desires it? Or does he desire it because it's already good? And these are the two poles of thought, kind of crudely put. Some people think that something is good just because God desires it. And sometimes this is looked upon very arbitrarily. God is not limited by anything. He can command anything, and we ought to obey. This was held by the Christian philosopher William of Ockham in the Middle Ages, and by a lot today, Christian philosophers, that God decides right and wrong. He's not limited by anything. He's not limited by having to love, to understand. He just arbitrarily decides, and that to say otherwise is to limit God's sovereignty. He's absolutely sovereign to determine the rules of right or wrong. Now, Socrates disagreed with that. He believed in following God's will, but he thought that God desired something because it was already good. God has the insight into good or bad. He doesn't make it good or bad. You know, he couldn't make torturing someone for fun good, nor would he want to. That his desires express his wisdom and his love, his knowledge, his understanding, and his love for everyone, and that it grows out of that. It's not an arbitrary thing. That in the West is sometimes called the natural law view. And I would more favor that, as did Socrates. And one inference from that is that we too, as we approximate God's wisdom, can ourselves come to a knowledge of good and bad. You know, we needn't always listen to what God tells us, you know, revealed through the scriptures or the Quran or the Bible, but he put into us the ability to understand, like how your action affects others, to put yourself in their place, to love one another, and that's a tendency inside of us that he put inside of us the ability to know right from wrong. We don't do it nearly as well as God. You know, when we try to get the facts, we're very limited in our understanding. We don't love as much as we should. You know, we are, God is like the perfect thinker, lover, not knower. And but we can share in that, and then we pray to God to help us to do that. That's a natural law of you. It's not just an arbitrary choice on God's will. And that's what I favor in my ethics and religion book, although I try to develop both sides. And some sides kind of get closer together as you pursue them further, especially the last few years. And this is a very strong dispute in the Christian tradition. You know, is ethics based on God's arbitrary will, or is it based on what's right or wrong in a way that God and we can both share? It's also a traditional dispute in the Muslim and the Jewish traditions, although I don't know as much about that. And one thing about the two traditions of philosophy well, really three with the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian, is that they tended to share ideas across the ages, and they still do, actually. And that's part of how, what do they say? Like St. Thomas Aquinas is the biggest and most important of the Christian philosophers. And he took so much from Averroes and Avicenna and people like that in the Muslim tradition, and vice versa, and also Moses Maimonides. So there's a sharing, but there's the common problem. If you say there's God and there's good, is something good just because God arbitrarily desires it? Or does God desire it because he knows that it's good? And that's a common, or some people try to say a little of both, and it gets complicated. But I try to go through that dispute pretty thoroughly in the other book, the one that's being translated into Persian, Ethics and Religion. It was prior in Arabic. So it will be in Arabic and in Persian.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Professor, philosophers have asked many questions about the relationship between religion and ethics. One of the questions that is very important in the Iranian academic community is religion based on morality, or is morality based on religion?
Well, again, you have the two views. One is that good is God's arbitrary will. The other is that there's an independent right or wrong that God knows. I like to put it this way. In my view, ethics has three parts. Two of these we believers can share with atheists. Whereas the third part is different at all. What can we share with atheists? The golden rule: treat others as we want to be treated. This is very popular. Some complain about my shirt that I don't have an atheist symbol, and they say, well, they accept it too, but not on, they don't bring religion into it. And this is based on kind of logical principles of be consistent is the most important thing, and make similar judgments about similar cases, keep your actions in accord with your goals, keep your moral beliefs in accord with how you live, keep your moral beliefs. It's kind of the logical structure of morality. That's the part we can share that with atheists. A second part is biology. The needs of the human being. We're intensely social animals, as opposed to other kinds of animals. We need to work together. We need food. We need possessions. We need to respect each other's possessions. We need family. The human is born extraordinarily premature. A horse is born and can walk around. A human requires years and years of love to develop. And this requires a family. Family life is very important. Morality needs to protect the family. It needs to protect possessions. It needs to protect speech. We talk, that's a form of communication. So some of the main commandments which are present across the world, things like thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not lie, are common because of human biological needs. And that atheist should be able to see. What doesn't the atheist see? Well, the connection with religion. That morality, I think, evolved, part of our evolution, but more importantly, it's part of God's plan for the world. God wanted to create a world where people would love one another, and it would not be easy. They would struggle, and and we would have inclinations in ourselves not to love one another, to be selfish, but we would struggle to do the right thing, to follow God's will, to love him and love our neighbor, and that the world is going toward a fulfillment of heaven, or the omega point, or however you describe it. It is headed toward a fulfillment where we're present with God. And this is all part of God's plan, and that we can have morality because God set us up that way. This was part of it. The atheist loses this. Morality is something that developed for human survival. Yeah, okay, I'll grant that, but there's a deeper plan.
Mhm.
And beyond that, there's a personal relationship with God. The biggest difference, I think, between atheist morality and the believer, whether and I'm speaking in very general terms, whether it be Muslim or Christian, is that the moral life is an act of loving God, and that in everything we do, we should be trying to love God. If I'm hiking a trail, and I'm a hiker, I love the mountains, and I see it as manifesting God's glory. And if I'm trying to do good to someone, I see myself as nourished by God's love and trying to imitate in a faint way God's love. So that the whole thing becomes, morality becomes extraordinarily personal on the religious view. And so morality is really, so there's three connections, there's three areas. There's the logic, treat others as you want to be treated. There's a consistency. Atheists can have that too. There's the human needs for family, for possessions, for truth. Atheists can have that too. But when you get to the connection with religion, especially the overall purpose, why are we here? Why is there a world at all? Well, we're here to love God and to bring ourselves to fulfillment in God, and the personal connection with God, which we live out. And I've had so many Muslim students over the years. Usually at Loyola, I'd have maybe out of a group of students, maybe I'd have 4 Muslims, and they were typically very religious, sometimes often more than the Christians. And a big part of that is how you live. You live out your religion by loving your neighbor, and it expresses your love for God. This has empirical consequences too. There's an atheist that I referred to in a couple of my books, who's reacting to the frequent atheist view that the religion is very harmful to society and we'd be better off without religion. Now, I will grant that perverted religion can be very harmful. In the United States, there's a lot of perverted religion. They don't follow the teachings of Jesus. So they think if you're a Christian, you hate Muslims, you hate gay people, you hate those that are different, blacks. That's not Christ's teaching. Islam can be perverted, Christianity can be perverted, and it can lead to wars and hatred, and this goes against the founders. Jesus said, love your neighbor, love your enemies. So perverted religion can be harmful, but religion as a whole is one of the most extraordinarily helpful things for people living together. And this atheist talks about many studies of that. You have people doing volunteer work to help the poor. How many volunteer who are atheists versus believers? Believers hugely more. And he goes through a lot of things. How many people give blood? How many people steal from their companies? How many people do volunteer work after college? And he goes through, he's an atheist. He's just trying to get the facts straight. And he says that one of the strongest motivations for a moral life is religion, and that religious people tend to live out the same values, but they live them out much more deeply. So this third element has a big consequence on human beings and how they live. Both we're part of a larger purpose, and God created us in the afterlife, and the personal relationship with God which is very strong really in your religion and my religion, as oriented toward how you live. And this has an effect on people. Sometimes people say religion doesn't matter for ethics. It matters, study, how people live, how well they do. So these three areas, I think two we share with atheists. The third one, we're different. And in very general terms, the way that I described it, it's, I was describing in general terms it would apply to a Muslim believer and a Christian believer. Now, there's going to be differences, but on the whole, they're really, there's a lot of similarities.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. That's excellent answer. You are great. Professor.
You're a very good interviewer. You did your homework.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Professor, golden rule in the religion of the world, including Christianity and Islam, and even how it applies to problems like nuclear weapon and the relationship between US and Iran. Please tell us about golden rule in this way.
Yeah, I think that the United States frequently acts as a bully. I taught for China. I taught in China for a semester, and the Trump was the worst president, I think, in the history of the United States. And his slogan was America first, put America first. I say put fairness first, be fair toward other nations, treat that's going to serve America better. We're doing all this stuff against China, which I have good friends in China, and they, we lie about the Trump lied like crazy about these other countries, and it became popular among the American people not to like China or Iran or Cuba or whatever. He was a divider. And you don't get anywhere that way. You put a tariff up, they respond, and you're fighting each other. What we need to do is to look at things from different points of view. What is their point of view? And understand the consequence of our actions and try to cooperate. Another example is Cuba. We have this long embargo against Cuba, going many years to try to, deter them from communism. Has it had any effect? No. The world condemns it. Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, condemns it. We're just hurting them. We need to have, they can't get replacement parts for their old cars, and it's just driving them into poverty. We need to cooperate instead of just bullying. Now with Iran, the bullying, that there was that treaty, and then Trump got in and said no, and then he started this embargo, and I think it's hurting Iran, economically. And again, this is condemned by most of the world. He has this adversary relationship. Now, if you look at the point of view of Iran, their neighbors have nuclear weapons. Israel has nuclear weapons, Pakistan, India, and the United States has nuclear weapons and is sometimes controlled by crazy people like Trump. I would be scared to death. So why, by the golden rule, we have to follow the same standards? We can't say it's right for me to have it because we have such wise leaders like Trump. People were scared to death at the end that he was going to throw out weapons. What we need to do is get together and say, look, this is a common problem for the world, the proliferation of nuclear weapons, along with COVID, the virus affecting the world, and global warming. We need to get together and cooperate and look for everyone's good. You promote the good of your country, not by pushing the good of your country. People are going to, you do an embargo or taxation or something against another, they're going to respond. They're going to be mad. You need to cooperate. And the golden rule is a great principle of that because it's common to the different nations of the world, the different religions, the different groups. And we all try to be fair. We look at the consequences on people and put ourselves in their place and try to understand this situation. What the world needs to do is to have a big war, not against each other, but against these forces of division, the virus, poverty, global warming, and we need to get rid of these nuclear weapons. And get rid of war. War is old-fashioned. Where we fight each other, the problem is not each other. The problem is global warming. It's poverty. It's the virus. It's things we need to get together about. So we need to have a more cooperative attitude. A war, yeah, but not against each other. Against things like war itself. War is old-fashioned. There shouldn't be any war. We have big problems. We're fighting wars against each other, and the world is going up in smoke with global warming and we're kind of stupid at times of the world. We need to get together, and the solution to it, I would say, is in the great religions of the world, the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. Cooperate, and instead of trying to force your will like a bully. Like when Trump lost the election, I was very happy. He was, oh God, he hated Iran and China and Cuba, where I have friends in all places, and the domestic policy of the United States changed radically. We're moving more toward healthcare, and that's a long story. The foreign policy isn't changing as much as it should, and I'm critical of Biden on this. He needs a different attitude toward Cuba, toward Iran, toward China. Yeah, and Trump had this, he would attack Canada and Mexico and Europe, our neighbors, and try to bully them. At least Biden isn't doing that, but Biden needs to move more toward a cooperative. Iran and the United States should sit down and try to be ultra fair toward each other and say, we don't want nuclear war. We want to get rid of COVID. How can we cooperate? The thing is, on these areas, the world isn't safe for any nation. If you have these COVID variants are coming out, if some little country halfway across the globe can develop this, and it can affect the United States, it can affect my country. We've got to, if you're not fair toward other countries, it's going to come back to you, and that's true with the vengeance of nuclear weapons. We need to firmly believe that war is obsolete, except war against poverty, global warming, COVID, things like that. And I think the golden rule can be a big help in that. So I'm critical of the United States foreign policy, although it's not as bad as with Trump. Trump was the supreme idiot.
Great. And I hope the presidents and the leaders around the world think as you think and familiar with the golden rule. Okay.
Yeah. I would hope that COVID is an example where we all have to work together. The United States has done a lot of vaccination and so forth, but like I have a friend in India. I have a lot of. I'm global.
Yes.
And they have. They're finally building up the vaccinations, and we have good vaccinations. And really, really good. And India makes vaccinations for the world, makes vaccines. We just needed to help them to, develop these ultra modern, and they're finally doing it. But yeah, I think we need a more global
Mhm.
global attitude.
Thank you very much. And Professor, in the book Ethics and Religion, you have a title named Natural Love and Rationality. Natural Love
Yeah,
and Rationality. I want to ask you, please, explain more about this title.
yeah. Well, it involves the golden rule is central, but the basic principles are to make a rational moral judgment. You have to first of all understand the facts, and then not just believe lies or stereotypes or distortions. And if you're dealing with another country, American attitudes are frequently not accurate. I mean, Afghanistan, whoa. Biden thought democracy would continue. No, you need an understanding of the situation and how actions affect others. You need empathy, the ability to put yourself in the place of the other person, having understood, and you need the golden rule, and you need other kinds of consistency too. The whole theory gets very complicated. So there's a consistency component, which is the logical part. The moral rationality factor brings in things like knowledge of the facts and imagination, and sometimes in subtle ways. In the United States, we had slavery for a long time, and still discrimination against people, especially Blacks, although that's getting better. Again, I have a lot of Muslim students, and well, a lot, or I did, maybe 4 in a classroom. And I sometimes would ask them if they would be discriminated against. And they say generally no, but that depends on where you live. If you live in a big city, in Chicago, there's people of every group and people just get along. Whereas in some areas of America, there's a lot more discrimination. They're mostly white, and they reject people different from them. There's a lot of that too. But where my students live are mostly the big cities. Part of discrimination is a part of the attack on discrimination is to understand why you have animosity toward people. Why do you hate Black people? Why do you dislike Muslims? Why do you dislike gay people? To understand that frequently people are brought up to hate another group, and this goes on and on and on. Whites are conditioned to think in terms of Blacks negative, and there's good and bad in all groups. And the American perceptions of Muslims frequently that way too. They're all terrorists. They're all going to shoot you. They all, are they all that way? No. Are Christians like that? Some are. There's good and bad in every group. So people are trained to hate each other. And in Israel, you have a long tradition of the Jews and the Palestinians, goes back thousands of years, and they were brought up, not to like each other. How do you handle that? Well, you try to get to know the people. You have maybe Zoom interviews and see that, there's good and bad in all of us, and we're not really all that different. One of my favorite examples in class is Shakespeare, who had a little drama called Romeo and Juliet. There were two different families, and they basically hated each other. Same religion, same race, same everything, except that they were conditioned to hate each other. And there is so much of that going on in the world today between groups. You're Muslim, I'm Christian, we're supposed to hate each other. There's a large cultural thing that we're fighting against. We're saying, get to know them. They're good people, and there's some bad people, but there's some bad people in my group but they're basically good people. Don't believe the lies that you were brought up. And that's part of moral rationality too. It's part of knowledge. It's a little more complicated, but that's a very strong ingredient we need. So we need to be open to people who are different from us. And that's one way of fighting this division. So that's part of moral rationality has a lot of the consistency chapter is just logic principles. If you hold this and you hold that, you're inconsistent, and you ought not to be inconsistent. Whereas the rationality part brings in other things like knowledge of your own feelings, how you were brought up too, and so forth. And it applies it to different areas. Like I spend a lot of time on racism in that area, because that is a particular problem in America. And it's gotten worse under Trump because he appeals to racists. We have a principle, all men are created equal. Everyone is worthy of respect and admiration and right, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's our ideal in the Declaration of Independence, the American. But then we had slavery for a long time, and we didn't follow it. And then that's one of the core moral struggles in America. The concern for everyone as a valued person with human rights is well expressed in the Golden Rule. And then the practice that often goes against that. We reject a group. We were trained, we were indoctrinated to have animosities toward other groups. And Trump pushed that. I mean, he got a lot of votes because that's a huge struggle in America now. We like to present ourselves as fairness and so forth toward everyone. And that's part of the tradition. But then we had slavery and we have discrimination too. So we need a consistency. And the Golden Rule it's a good way to point that. Imagine that you were discriminated against in that case. How do you react to that?
Okay. Professor, thank you very much. If you have a time, I have 2 questions.
Go ahead. I'm not too tired.
Okay.
I'm kind of sickly these days with the cancer and so forth, but I ask more.
Okay. I hope and pray me and family as soon as possible. You are better and great. That's great. You are a great person. You are a great philosopher. And I really pray for you.
Thank you much.
Okay. Professor, one of the important things that can be talked about it is the main contrast between the divine command view and natural law, which is somewhat like a parallel controversy in Islamic thought. Please explain that and talk about this.
Well, why is it bad to hurt people? Okay. Is it just because God forbids it? Suppose that God didn't forbid it. Suppose that God commanded it. Would that make it good? Now, an extreme divine command theory would say, yes, it would be good if God wanted us to hate one another. Now, there's more moderate forms that would try to reject that. It's not just the will of God, but it's the will of a loving God, et cetera, et cetera. But the extreme view would say God decides the moral order completely freely. If you say that he's got to be a loving God, you're restricting God. And so God can tell us to hate one another, and then that's our duty. This can lead to practical problems, especially if you have this bad notion of God that he does want us to hate people of other groups. I mean, it's a dangerous theory. The natural law theory says that hurting people for its own sake is bad in itself. It's not bad because God commands it and forbids it. God forbids it because it's wrong. He knows what's wrong. He has this superior insight. He knows the facts. He's loving. He's fair. He's, our little minds can be so easily corrupted. God is beyond that. So he forbids, hurting people just for fun because it's already wrong, and he knows it, and he backs it up. That is very basically the difference between divine command theory, which has God arbitrarily decides, and he could decide that we should hate each other, and natural law, which says there's an objective right or wrong. Hurting people just for fun is bad, and God knows it, and he commands it. Now, it gets more complicated as you go further. And my book talks about a lot of the complications, and these should be of interest for people of Muslim or Jewish religions too, who are involved in the same sort of controversy. Maybe other religions too, but I don't know that so much.
Okay, thank you.
But it gets complicated if you move beyond that initial contrast. So the people in the divine command theory try to incorporate some of the natural law ideas. Some of them say, well, I have a good colleague at Loyola, who's Tom Carson, who wrote a book defending what he calls the divine preference theory. But it isn't just because the creator of the world desires it, but that makes it good. But it's because a loving, knowledgeable creator of the world desires it, which is moving more toward the middle. And on my view, I make a little movement toward the divine command theory, in that there could be cases where knowledge and love doesn't give you the precise answer. And maybe we should follow God's will, especially since we don't have the knowledge of God. I mean, when we make moral judgments, we try to love, we try to be consistent, we try to imagine the situation of another person, we try to have knowledge, but we're not quite up to God on any of this. So on difficult cases, if there's a clear message from God, then that should determine it. And so there's the two extreme views, and then there's kind of a movement. A little bit, I move a little bit toward the middle on that. So.
Thank you very much.
But not far.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And the last question I want to ask you to talk about it, about meaning of life. That's the important issue. The meaning of life is one of the important discussion in the philosophy of ethics, even in the philosophy of religion. And I see the world and the people, the young, especially the young peoples, struggle with the meaning of life. And I want to ask you, please tell us about the meaning of life.
Well, I can put that in very simple terms, which is shared by Christianity and Islam. There's a wonderful website, a Muslim website called A Common Word. I don't know, are you familiar?
No.
Go to it, acommonword.com, and it expresses from a Muslim point of view that really the most important thing is something that Christians and Muslims share. The importance of loving God above all things with your heart and mind and soul and strength. Now, that's the Christian expression, Muslims would put it, have the same idea, to love God, Allah, and love your neighbor as yourself, the golden rule. Why were we created? To love one another. What is our purpose in life? Most fundamentally, to love God and to love our neighbor. I can put that very simply. If we do that, we're happier, we have a better world, we have eternal life, we have fulfillment. Even facing cancer now, your attitude toward things matters hugely. Does life have a meaning? It does, why are we here? Is this a meaningless world? No, it is not. We're created by loving God, to love God above all things and to love your neighbor as yourself, something that both religions share. And I think that's really the meaning of life.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here with you today. I want to thank you for joining me in this interview. You are a great person. You are a great philosopher. Your books, that's great. I want to thank you for you to writing, to wrote these great books.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
I'm supposed to have 1.5 years more to live, but if I live 4 more years, I want to write another book. My ethics book has little stories from students about ethics, what they believe in. Frequently, it's very distorted and so forth. And then there's a philosophical analysis, but it's all ethics. This last book, if I live long enough, would be the same thing, but about religion. So we would have students telling stories about what they believe, and especially their objections to religion. There can't be a God because there's so much suffering in the world, or we need to follow objective science instead of this flimsy religion thing, and religion is just following wish fulfillment. And objections to religion put in the language of students. You can't prove, you got to prove everything. And then an analysis, which I think a lot of modern science leads us more to God than away from God. Fine tuning the so-called column argument, which goes back to medieval Muslim philosophers. And so put it in student terms and reactions to that, like my ethics book, which is in 3 editions and about 6 different languages. I think it could be a success if I can live 4 more years. I told God, hey, I'd like to live 4 more years, but he may have other plans. I don't know. Maybe I will. But and that would be in very general terms, which would be suitable for Muslim college students who are struggling with faith, or Christian or atheists who are wondering maybe there is a God. In student terms, it's a very effective presentation way of doing it, and I hope I can do that as maybe my last book. I don't know. I might live for 20 more years. I mean, who knows?
Professor, I'm sure you are writing another books. You're writing another great book, and I pray for you every time. When you wrote another book, and when published, I ask you, give me another opportunity and another chance to interview with you about this book.
Okay. Maybe 4 years. I don't know if I'm still around.
Anytime you.
And let me say that you are the best interviewer I've ever heard in my entire life.
Really?
I mean, you've done a lot of the homework. You know the questions. You are just marvelous. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
I really appreciate it. That's great. That's great. I'm sorry about my language. I'm not good at language. By the way, I'm sorry.
You are very good at English. I have a special thing with my hearing aids. It goes directly from my computer to the hearing aids, and the quality is so much better. I had very little, problem understanding you, despite my bad hearing.
That's
So now this has been recorded. Could I get a recording of this?
yes, yes. You know, I wanted to put the Farsi subtitle in this video, and edit this video. And when complete, I send you the link to you get download it.
Wonderful. I would appreciate it because I think it went pretty well.
Okay, and
thanks
then
mostly to you.
that's good. And also, I published a report of this interview in the great newspaper in the page of science, in the page of religion. That's and when published that report and newspaper or website, I sent you the link and PDF.
I would appreciate any links that you could send. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you very much, Professor. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, and may God bless you and your work too.
That's great. I really hope as soon as possible you publish another book and we can learn another thing about ethics, about religion from you. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you
much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.